The great hall of the Galactic Union space station shimmered with lights from 1,000 stars visible through the massive windows. Ambassador Karen of the Velthi Collective adjusted his long blue robes and tried to calm his racing hearts. Both of them beat fast inside his chest as he watched the human delegation enter the room. The humans walked in a strange way. They did not glide or float or scurry. They simply put one foot in front of the other, their bodies moving up and down with each step. Karen had read about this in the briefing documents, but seeing it in person was different. They called it walking, and it looked exhausting. There were 5 humans in the group. At the front was a woman with dark hair pulled back from her face. She smiled at everyone she passed, showing her teeth in what Karen had been told was a friendly gesture. Behind her came 4 others, 2 men and 2 women, all carrying tablets and folders of paper. Paper? Karen had not seen actual paper in decades. Most species had abandoned such primitive materials long ago. But humans, it seemed, still liked to write things down the old way. "Welcome to the Galactic Union Peace Summit," announced the computer voice that echoed through the hall. "All delegates, please take your seats. The negotiations will begin shortly." Karen floated to his assigned seat, his tentacles curling underneath him as he settled into the specially designed chair. Beside him sat Ambassador Threx of the Morandi Empire, a massive creature covered in thick gray scales. On his other side was the small and nervous-looking delegate from the Pixari Federation, whose name Karen could never quite pronounce. The humans did not float to their seats. They walked. And then, to Karen's amazement, they simply bent their bodies in half and sat down on the hard chairs without any cushions or support systems. "Do they not feel pain?" whispered Threx, his deep voice rumbling through the translator device. "I do not know," Karen replied. "The briefing said they have what they call bones inside their bodies, rigid structures that hold them up." Threx made a sound of disgust. "Barbaric. How do they survive with such limitations?" Before Karen could answer, the head of the Galactic Union Council rose from her seat at the front of the room. High Counselor Mareth was ancient by any species standards, her silver skin wrinkled and thin. She had led these peace talks for over 300 years, and everyone respected her wisdom. "We are gathered here today to discuss the territorial dispute in the Outer Rim," Mareth said, her voice carrying easily through the hall. "The conflict has gone on for too long. Too many lives have been lost. It is time for peace." There were murmurs of agreement throughout the room. Even the Craxi delegates, who were known for their aggressive nature, nodded their large heads. "The negotiations will follow standard protocol," Mareth continued. "We will discuss each issue in turn, with breaks scheduled every 2 hours for rest and refreshment. The process may take several days, but I am confident we can reach an agreement." Karen relaxed slightly. 2-hour sessions with breaks were manageable. The Velthi needed regular rest periods to maintain their focus, and he knew most other species were the same. These negotiations were always slow and careful, with plenty of time for everyone to recover between discussions. The human ambassador raised her hand. "High Counselor, if I may." Mareth looked surprised but nodded. "Yes, Ambassador Chen." The human stood up, and Karen noticed that she was taller than he had first thought. Her voice was clear and strong when she spoke. "My delegation was wondering if we could extend the sessions. 2 hours seems rather short for such important matters. Perhaps we could meet for longer periods and get through the issues faster." A shocked silence fell over the hall. Karen's tentacles twitched with anxiety. Longer sessions. Was this human serious? "How long did you have in mind?" Mareth asked carefully. Ambassador Chen shrugged her shoulders, a gesture Karen did not fully understand. 8 hours. 10. We really want to get this peace treaty done. We have been at war for too long. 8 hours. Karen felt his heart speed up again. 8 hours of continuous negotiation was unheard of. Most species could barely manage 3 hours before needing rest. The physical and mental strain would be enormous. "Perhaps Ambassador Chen does not understand our protocols," said the Craxi delegate, his voice harsh. "Extended negotiations of that length would be harmful to many species present." "Oh, I'm sorry," Chen said quickly. "I didn't mean to cause offense. We humans are used to long work days. I sometimes forget that other species need more rest than we do. 2 hours is fine." She sat back down, but the damage was done. Every delegate in the room was now staring at the humans with a mixture of fear and curiosity. What kind of creatures could work for 8 or 10 hours without stopping? The first session of negotiations began, and Karen tried to focus on the discussions. The territorial dispute was complex, involving multiple star systems and ancient claims that went back thousands of years. Each species had their own version of history, their own grievances, their own demands. The humans listened carefully to everything. They took notes on their paper with small instruments they called pens. They whispered to each other and nodded along with the other delegates' arguments. They seemed professional and reasonable. But Karen could not stop watching them. The human called Chen had not moved from her seated position since the session began. She did not shift or adjust or show any signs of discomfort. Her body remained perfectly still except for her hands and her head. How could she do that? Karen had to move every few minutes to prevent his tentacles from cramping. He saw Threx stretching his massive arms and rolling his shoulders. Even the tiny Pixari delegate was bouncing slightly in her seat, unable to keep still. The humans just sat there, motionless, patient, waiting. When the 2-hour break was announced, Karen floated out of the hall as quickly as he could. He needed rest. He needed water. He needed to process everything he had just witnessed. "Are you well, Ambassador?" asked one of his aides, a young Velthi named Sira. "I am troubled," Karen admitted. "These humans, there is something strange about them." "They seemed polite enough," Sira said. "Yes, but did you see them? Did you see how they sat there for 2 hours without moving, without showing any fatigue?" Sira considered this. Perhaps they were hiding it well. "Perhaps," Karen said, but he was not convinced. In the rest area, he found several other delegates gathered in small groups, all whispering about the same thing. The humans had made an impression, and not just because of their unusual suggestion about longer sessions. "I heard they do not sleep," said the Pixari delegate, her voice high and nervous. "They stay awake for days at a time." "That cannot be true," Threx said dismissively. "All creatures need sleep." "The humans do sleep," said a voice from behind them. They turned to see one of the human delegates, a young man with light hair and a friendly smile. "We sleep about 8 hours a day. Well, some of us do, others manage on less." 8 hours, Karen was shocked. "That is barely a third of your day cycle. What do you do with the rest of the time?" The human laughed, showing his teeth. "Work mostly, or exercise, or hobbies. There's always something to do." "Exercise," Threx repeated. "You mean deliberate physical strain, on purpose?" "Sure, we need to keep our bodies strong. Otherwise we get sick or weak. Running, lifting weights, swimming, that kind of thing." Karen exchanged a worried look with the other delegates. The humans deliberately made their bodies tired, and then they kept working. It was madness. "I should get back to my delegation," the human said cheerfully. "See you after the break." He walked away, his strange legs carrying him smoothly across the floor. Karen watched him go and felt a cold fear settling in his stomach. These humans were not normal. They were something else entirely, and Karen was beginning to wonder if the galaxy was ready for them. The negotiations continued for the rest of that first day. Each session lasted exactly 2 hours, with generous breaks in between. The humans accepted this schedule without complaint, though Karen noticed them exchanging looks whenever a break was announced. By the end of the day, they had made some progress. Several minor issues had been resolved, and there was hope that the larger problems could be addressed tomorrow. High Counselor Marith declared the first day a success and dismissed everyone to rest. Karen returned to his quarters exhausted. The mental effort of following the discussions and formulating responses had drained him completely. He fell into his sleeping pool and let the warm water soothe his tired body. Tomorrow would be another long day, but at least, he thought, it would follow the same predictable pattern. 2 hours of work, then rest. Work, then rest. The humans might be strange, but they had agreed to play by the rules. He closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep, hoping that his fears were unfounded. They were not. The second day of negotiations began normally enough. Everyone gathered in the Great Hall, took their seats, and waited for High Counselor Marith to open the session. But before she could speak, Ambassador Chen raised her hand again. "High Counselor, my delegation has a concern." Marith nodded for her to continue. "At this pace, these negotiations will take weeks, perhaps months. Meanwhile, people are dying in the conflict zones, ships are being destroyed, families are being torn apart." Chen's voice was calm but serious. "We would like to propose a more intensive schedule. We could work through the night with minimal breaks and try to reach an agreement as quickly as possible." The hall erupted in shocked conversation. Work through the night, minimal breaks. The suggestions were absurd, impossible, dangerous. "Ambassador Chen," Marith said carefully, "I understand your urgency, but the health and well-being of our delegates must come first. Extended negotiations of that nature would cause serious harm to many species." "Then perhaps the humans could continue while others rest," Chen suggested. "We could prepare summary documents, draft proposals, work on the details. Then when everyone returns, we would have more material to discuss." There was a long pause. Karen could see the other delegates considering this idea with horror. The thought of the humans working alone, unsupervised, throughout the night was terrifying. What might they accomplish? What advantage might they gain? "That is an unusual suggestion," Marith said. "Let me consult with the other delegation leaders." The council called a short recess. Karen floated over to where the Craxi and Morandi delegates were gathered, their faces grim. "We cannot allow this," said the Craxi leader, his claws clicking nervously. "If the humans work while we sleep, they will control the entire negotiation." "But refusing them makes us look weak," Threx argued. "They will know we cannot match their endurance." "They already know," Karen said quietly. "They knew from the moment they arrived. This is a test. They are measuring us." The Craxi leader turned his massive head toward the human delegation. Chen and her colleagues were sitting calmly in their seats, talking quietly among themselves. They did not look tired. They did not look impatient. They looked like they could sit there forever. "What are these creatures?" the Craxi whispered. Karen did not have an answer. When the session resumed, Marith announced that the humans' proposal had been rejected. The negotiations would continue as planned, with regular breaks and reasonable hours. Chen accepted this decision gracefully, but Karen saw something flicker in her eyes. Was it disappointment? Amusement? The talks continued. Hour after hour, the delegates argued and debated and bargained. Karen felt his energy draining away with each passing minute. His tentacles ached. His mind wandered. Twice he had to ask for points to be repeated because he had lost focus. The humans showed no such weakness. They participated actively in every discussion. They asked sharp questions and made detailed proposals. They never seemed to tire, never seemed to lose concentration. When the day finally ended, Karen was barely able to float back to his quarters. He collapsed into his sleeping pool without even removing his robes. In the corridor outside, he heard 2 of his aides talking. "Did you see the humans today? They looked fresh at the end as they did at the beginning. I know it is unnatural. Maybe their bodies are different inside. Maybe they do not feel tiredness like we do. If that is true, then we are in trouble. How can we negotiate with creatures who never get tired?" Karen closed his eyes and tried not to think about it. But sleep was a long time coming, and when it finally arrived, it was filled with dreams of humans who never stopped, never rested, never showed any sign of weakness. And tomorrow, it would all begin again. The third day brought crisis. Overnight, news had arrived of a major battle in the disputed territory. Hundreds of ships destroyed, thousands of lives lost. The conflict was escalating, and the need for a peace agreement was more urgent than ever. High Counselor Murith called an emergency session. All delegates were required to attend immediately, regardless of their rest schedules. This was unprecedented, but the situation demanded it. Karen dragged himself from his sleeping pool, his body screaming for more rest. He had managed only 4 hours of sleep, and it was not enough. His tentacles moved sluggishly. His thoughts came slow and fuzzy. In the great hall, he saw that he was not alone in his exhaustion. Every delegate looked tired, worn, diminished. The Pixari delegate was trembling visibly. Threx's scales had lost their healthy shine. Even the fierce Craxi warriors seemed subdued. Only the humans looked normal. They walked in with the same steady pace as before, took their seats, and waited patiently for the session to begin. "How do they do it?" Sira whispered to Karen. He shook his head. He did not know. He was beginning to suspect that no one did. Murith opened the session with a summary of the overnight events. The battle had been devastating, and both sides were calling for revenge rather than peace. The negotiations were at a critical point. "We must work together," Murith said, her ancient voice weary. "We must find a solution before more lives are lost." And so they worked. Hour after hour, proposal after proposal, argument after argument. The debates grew heated. Voices were raised. Accusations were made. Through it all, the humans remained calm. When others lost their tempers, Chen spoke softly and reasonably. When discussions went in circles, she suggested new approaches. When everyone else was ready to give up, she pushed for one more try. The first break came after 3 hours. Karen had never been so grateful for rest. He floated to the refreshment area and consumed as much energy supplement as he dared. Around him, other delegates did the same, their faces drawn and pale. But when the break ended and everyone returned to the hall, the humans were already there. They had not left their seats. They had not taken any refreshments. They had simply sat there, reviewing their notes and preparing for the next session. "Do they not need to eat?" asked the Pixari delegate, her voice barely above a whisper. "Apparently not often," Karen replied. "This cannot be normal. Something is wrong with them." But nothing was wrong with them. This was simply who they were, creatures of impossible endurance, of endless patience, of tireless determination. And everyone in the galaxy was only beginning to understand what that meant. The crisis session continued. 8 hours passed, then 10, then 12. Delegates began to leave, unable to continue. The Pixari delegation withdrew after 9 hours, their representative too exhausted to speak. Several others followed, sending apologies and requesting summaries of any progress made. But the humans stayed. And so Karen stayed too, determined not to show weakness. He was the Velthi representative and his species had a reputation to maintain. If these strange humans could endure, then so could he. It was a mistake. By hour 15, Karen could barely keep his eyes open. His tentacles had gone numb hours ago. His thoughts were scattered and confused. When Chen asked him a direct question about Velthi territorial claims, he had to ask her to repeat it 3 times before he could formulate a response. She did not seem frustrated. She did not seem impatient. She simply waited, her face kind and understanding, while Karen struggled to organize his failing mind. "Perhaps we should take a break," she suggested gently. "Yes," Karen managed to say, "perhaps that would be wise." When the break was called, Karen did not float. He could not. His body had reached its limit. Sira had to help him to the rest area, supporting him with her own exhausted tentacles. "Ambassador, you must rest," she pleaded. "You cannot continue like this." "But the negotiations." "We'll still be there tomorrow. You need to sleep." Karen wanted to argue, but he had no strength left. He let Sira guide him to his quarters and lowered himself into the sleeping pool. Within seconds, he was unconscious. He slept for 12 hours. When he finally woke, he felt restored but deeply troubled. What had happened while he was unconscious? What progress had been made? What concessions had been extracted? He rushed to the great hall, only to find it nearly empty. A few aides and assistants were scattered about, reviewing documents and comparing notes. High Counselor Mareth sat at the front of the room, looking more tired than Karen had ever seen her. And there, still in their seats, were the humans. They had not left. They had not slept. For more than 12 hours after Karen had collapsed, they had continued working, drafting proposals, reviewing documents, preparing for the next session. Chen looked up as Karen approached. She smiled, but he could see the shadows under her eyes. Even humans, it seemed, were not completely immune to exhaustion. "Good morning, Ambassador Karen," she said. "Did you rest well?" "I did," he said carefully. "Did you?" "Not yet, but soon. We made a lot of progress last night. I think we might be close to an agreement." Close to an agreement? After just 3 days? Negotiations like these normally took weeks, sometimes months, and the humans had done it by simply refusing to stop. Karen looked at the stack of documents on Chen's table. There were dozens of them, all filled with detailed proposals and carefully worded compromises. She had been productive while half the galaxy slept. "You are remarkable creatures," he said quietly. Chen's smile widened, but there was something sad in her eyes. "We just want the fighting to stop. Every hour we spend talking is an hour when people aren't dying. That matters to us." It was a simple statement, but it struck Karen deeply. The humans were not trying to gain advantage. They were not trying to intimidate or manipulate. They simply wanted peace, and they were willing to work harder than anyone else to achieve it. Maybe, he thought, the galaxy had nothing to fear from humans after all. Maybe they were exactly what the universe needed. But as he looked at the weary faces of the other delegates who were slowly trickling back into the hall, he knew that fear would not disappear easily. The humans had demonstrated something that day, something that would change how every species viewed them. They had shown that they could outlast anyone, and in the harsh world of galactic politics, that was power of the most dangerous kind. The negotiations entered their final phase. After the marathon session of the previous day, most of the major issues had been resolved. Only a few details remained, and everyone was eager to finish. But the damage had been done. Throughout the hall, delegates whispered about the humans. Stories were told and retold, each version more dramatic than the last. The humans had worked for 30 hours straight. The humans had not eaten or slept. The humans had shown no signs of fatigue. Most of these stories were exaggerations. The humans had eaten, though not often. They had rested briefly, though not long enough. They had been tired, though they had hidden it well. But the truth hardly mattered anymore. The legend of human endurance had been born, and it would spread to every corner of the galaxy. Karen watched Chen as she presented the final version of the peace treaty. She spoke clearly and confidently, laying out the terms that would end the conflict. Her voice was steady despite her obvious exhaustion. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, one by one, the delegates rose to their feet and signaled their approval. The treaty was accepted. The war was over. Chen closed her eyes for a moment, and Karen saw relief wash over her face. Real relief, deep and genuine. She had pushed herself to the breaking point for this moment, and it had been worth it. The celebration that followed was subdued. Everyone was too tired for revelry. But there was satisfaction in the air, a sense that something important had been accomplished. Karen approached Chen as she was gathering her documents. "Ambassador, may I speak with you?" "Of course," she said. "I want to thank you. What you did, what your delegation did, it made this agreement possible." Chen shook her head. "We all worked together, every species contributed." "But you contributed more. You gave more. I do not understand how you did it, but I am grateful." For a long moment Chen was quiet. Then she sighed and sat down heavily in her chair. "Can I tell you something, Ambassador? In confidence?" Karen floated closer, intrigued. "Of course." "I'm exhausted. More exhausted than I've ever been in my life. Every muscle in my body hurts. My head feels like it's filled with static. I want to sleep for a week." "Then why did you push yourself so hard?" Chen looked out the window at the stars. "Because on my world, millions of people are affected by this conflict. Families torn apart, children orphaned, communities destroyed. Every hour that the war continued was another hour of suffering for them." She turned back to Karen. "I would have worked for a month straight if that's what it took. Some things are worth the pain." Karen felt something shift inside him. He had been afraid of the humans, intimidated by their impossible endurance. But now he understood. They were not strange or alien or dangerous. They were simply people who cared deeply and were willing to sacrifice for what they believed in. "Your species has a remarkable spirit," he said. Chen laughed softly. "We call it stubbornness. It's one of our defining traits." "Whatever you call it, it has saved lives today. Many lives. That's all that matters." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars drift past the windows. The great hall slowly emptied as delegates returned to their quarters for well-deserved rest. The peace summit was over. The war had ended, and the galaxy had learned something new about the strange, stubborn, extraordinary creatures called humans. They could outlast anyone, and they would do it for the sake of peace. The news of the peace treaty spread quickly through the galaxy. Within days, every major news network was reporting on the agreement that had ended one of the bloodiest conflicts in recent history. And with the news came the stories about the humans. They never tire, they never stop, they never give up. It was not entirely accurate, but it was close enough to the truth to be terrifying. Species that had never interacted with humans began to view them with new respect and fear. Trade delegations studied human business practices, worried about being outworked. Military strategists revised their assessments, concerned about facing enemies who would fight without rest. Karen watched the reports with mixed feelings. The humans deserved recognition for their role in the peace talks, but the fear spreading through the galaxy troubled him. Fear led to bad decisions. Fear led to conflict. He requested a meeting with Ambassador Chen before she departed the station. She agreed, and they met in a small observation deck overlooking the planet below. "You've seen the news," Chen said. "It was not a question." "I have. The stories about your species are spreading." "Yeah, we've noticed." Chen's expression was complicated. "Some of my colleagues think it's good. They say fear will keep other species from attacking us." "And what do you think?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think fear is a terrible foundation for peace. We didn't push ourselves during those negotiations to make others afraid of us. We did it because we wanted the fighting to stop." "I know," Karen said, "but others may not understand that." "Then we'll have to help them understand." Chen turned to face him directly. "Ambassador, would you be willing to speak about what happened here? Tell people the truth about what we did and why we did it." Karen considered this. His report to the Velthi Collective would shape how his species viewed humans for generations. He could emphasize their frightening endurance, or he could tell the fuller story of their dedication and sacrifice. "I will tell the truth," he said finally, "all of it." Chen smiled, and for the first time since Karen had met her, she looked truly relaxed. "Thank you, that's all we can ask." They shook hands, a human gesture that Karen had learned. It felt strange but appropriate. As Chen's ship departed the station, Karen returned to his quarters to begin his report. He would describe the humans' remarkable endurance, but he would also describe their kindness. He would mention their refusal to stop, but he would explain why they pushed so hard. The galaxy would learn to fear humans. That was inevitable. But perhaps, if Karen chose his words carefully, they would also learn to respect them. And maybe, in time, fear would give way to understanding. That was a peace worth working for. The months that followed the summit brought changes that no one had anticipated. Delegations from across the galaxy requested human advisors for their own negotiations. Trade missions sought human partners known for their tireless work ethic. Universities created research programs to study human physiology and psychology. And slowly, the fear began to fade. It was replaced by something more complex. Awe, certainly. Respect, definitely. But also curiosity, admiration, and even affection. The humans were different, but different did not have to mean dangerous. Karen watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. His report had helped, as had similar reports from other delegates who had witnessed the Peace Summit. The truth about humans was spreading, and it was more nuanced than the fearful stories that had come before. 1 year after the summit, Karen received an invitation that surprised him. Ambassador Chen was organizing a reunion of the delegates who had participated in the negotiations. She wanted to celebrate the anniversary of the peace treaty and reflect on what they had accomplished together. Karen accepted immediately. The reunion was held on Earth, in a city called Geneva. Karen had never visited the human homeworld before, and he was nervous about the gravity. Humans lived on a planet with strong gravity, much stronger than what most species found comfortable. But when he arrived, he discovered that the venue had been modified to accommodate different species. Variable gravity zones allowed everyone to move comfortably. The temperature was adjustable, the food was diverse, and the lighting could be customized for different visual systems. The humans had thought of everything. Of course they had. Chen greeted him at the entrance, looking healthy and well-rested. The exhausted diplomat from the Peace Summit was gone, replaced by a vibrant woman with energy to spare. "Ambassador Karen, thank you for coming," she said warmly. "Thank you for inviting me. This is remarkable." Chen shrugged. "We wanted everyone to feel welcome. It took some work to get the details right, but we managed." Work, the humans always did more work. It was who they were. The reunion was wonderful. Delegates who had been adversaries during the negotiations now shared food and stories like old friends. The peace treaty had held, and the region that had once been torn by war was now recovering and rebuilding. During the evening, Karen found himself in conversation with several other delegates about the impact of the summit. They all agreed that the treaty itself was important, but the real significance was something else. "The humans showed us something that day," said Threx, his voice thoughtful. "They showed us what determination looks like." "And dedication," added the Pixari delegate, no longer nervous. "They stayed awake for us. They worked for us. They made themselves uncomfortable so that we could have peace." "They frightened me at first," Karen admitted. "I thought they were dangerous." "They are dangerous," said the Craxi leader, "but not in the way we feared. They are dangerous to conflict, dangerous to injustice, dangerous to those who would make war." It was an interesting observation. The humans' greatest weapon was not their endurance or their strength. It was their unwillingness to accept defeat. When faced with impossible challenges, they simply refused to stop trying. That night, as the reunion wound down and delegates prepared to return to their homeworlds, Chen found Karen by the window. He was looking out at the human city, watching the lights that never seemed to dim. "You people never rest," he said. "Even your cities stay awake all night." Chen laughed. "Some of us like the quiet hours. It's a good time to think." "What do you think about?" "The future mostly. What comes next? how we can make things better." She paused. "You know, when we first joined the galactic community, a lot of species were afraid of us. They thought we were aggressive, unpredictable, dangerous." "Some still think that," Karen said. "I know, but it's getting better, slowly." Chen smiled. "The Peace Summit helped. When other species saw what we were willing to do for peace, they started to understand us better." "You could have used your endurance for conquest," Karen said. "Many species would have." "We could have," Chen agreed. "But that's not who we want to be. We've had enough wars in our history. We know where that path leads." Karen thought about this. The humans had power that could have made them conquerors. Instead, they chose to be peacekeepers. It was a remarkable decision, and it said something important about their character. "I am glad we met you," Karen said finally, "even if you did terrify half the galaxy." Chen's laugh was bright and genuine. "We're sorry about that. We really didn't mean to scare anyone." "I know, but perhaps it was good that you did. Fear made us pay attention, and paying attention helped us see the truth." "What truth?" Karen extended one of his tentacles in the human gesture of friendship that he had learned. "That humans are not to be feared. They are to be admired. And perhaps, if we are very fortunate, they are to be called friends." Chen took his tentacle in her hand and shook it gently. "That's all we ever wanted, Ambassador, to be friends." The stars shone overhead, bright and endless. Somewhere out there, a galaxy was changing, slowly learning to see humans as allies rather than threats. It would take time. It would take patience. It would take endurance. But humans were very, very good at endurance. The years passed, and the story of the Peace Summit became legend. It was told in schools across the galaxy, studied by diplomats and politicians, analyzed by historians and sociologists. The moment when humans demonstrated their extraordinary determination had changed everything. Trade between human worlds and other species flourished. Cultural exchanges brought new ideas and perspectives to civilizations that had existed for millennia. Scientific cooperation accelerated progress in fields from medicine to engineering. And always at the center of it all were the humans, working, building, creating, never stopping, never resting, never giving up. Karen returned to Earth several times over the following decades. He watched the human cities grow and change. He saw their technology advance and their society evolve, and he marveled at their endless capacity for effort. "Do you never get tired of working?" he asked Chen during one visit. She was older now, her hair gray and her face lined with age, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but then I remember what we're working for, a better future, a galaxy at peace, a universe where all species can thrive. These are worthy goals. They're the only goals that matter." Chen smiled, and Karen saw in her face the same determination that had amazed him at the Peace Summit so long ago. "We have a saying on Earth, the future belongs to those who show up, and we intend to keep showing up every day for as long as it takes." It was a simple philosophy, but it captured something essential about humans. They were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the smartest or the fastest or the most technologically advanced, but they were the most persistent. And in the end, persistence was all that mattered. Karen lived long enough to see the transformation complete. The galaxy that had once feared humans now welcomed them. The stories of terror had been replaced by stories of partnership. The strange creatures who never stopped working were now trusted allies and valued friends. On his final visit to Earth, Karen sat with Chen's daughter, a woman named Maya who had become a diplomat like her mother. They talked about the old days, about the Peace Summit, about the fear that had gripped the galaxy when humans first demonstrated their endurance. "Your mother changed everything," Karen said. "She showed us what humans truly are." Maya nodded slowly. She always said that the Peace Summit was the proudest moment of her life, not because of what she achieved, but because of what it meant. "What did it mean?" That we could be more than warriors, more than conquerors, more than the aggressive primates that other species saw us as. Maya's eyes were bright with unshed tears. She wanted to prove that humans could be a force for good in the galaxy. I think she succeeded. She did, Karen agreed. She absolutely did. That night, as Karen's ship rose above the blue curve of Earth, he looked down at the planet that had produced such remarkable creatures. They were still awake down there, still working, still striving for something better. They would never stop. It was not in their nature. And the galaxy was infinitely richer for it. The legend of the Peace Summit endured for thousands of years. It was passed down from generation to generation, told in countless languages on countless worlds. The story evolved with each telling, but the core truth remained the same. When the galaxy needed peace, humans were willing to work for it. When others gave up, humans kept going. When the task seemed impossible, humans refused to accept defeat. It was terrifying at first, then it was inspiring, and finally it was simply who they were. Humanity, the species that never stopped, the friends who never tired of helping, the allies who would work until the job was done, no matter how long it took. The Galactic Diplomats who had fled in terror that day eventually became some of humanity's closest partners. They learned that human endurance was not a threat, but a promise. A promise that, when the universe faced its greatest challenges, there would always be someone willing to keep fighting. And so the story ended, not with fear, but with hope. Hope for a future built by those who refused to give up. Hope for a galaxy united by persistence and determination. Hope for all species, working together, never stopping, never resting, until the work was finally done. This was humanity's gift to the stars, not their strength, not their technology, not their numbers. Their endurance. And it would change the universe forever.